Hello and welcome to Premier Unbelievable, the show that brings thinkers, Christians, skeptics, and all those in between into friendly dialogue about the biggest questions in life, faith, and science. I'm John Nelson, and today we're debating all things cosmological and whether recent discoveries in cosmology point us towards God. Our first guest on the show is Dr. Niayesh Afshordi, a leading cosmologist at the University of Waterloo, who has suggested that our universe may have emerged from a black hole. Niayesh is the co-author of the highly acclaimed Battle of the Big Bang. I'm pleased to have my signed copy over here, which he's co-written with a good friend of the show, Phil Halper. Niayesh, congratulations on the book and welcome to the show.
Thank you, John. It's a pleasure to be here.
Joining the dialogue with Niayesh today is Michel-Yves Bolloré, who is the co-author of the best-selling volume, God, the Science, the Evidence. Michel is an engineer and entrepreneur who never set out to be a theologian, yet his book argues that a series of recent discoveries in cosmology may have brought us closer than ever before to a scientific proof of God. Michel, welcome to the show.
Thank you, John.
What I really like about both of your books is that you tell the story of cosmology, and particularly this story as it has unfolded in the 20th century. And one of the big issues in the 20th century is the beginning of the universe. So I'd like us to start by talking about whether the universe had a definite beginning. Maybe, Michel, we can start with you and you can unpack what happened in the 20th century that led some cosmologists to think the universe actually had a beginning.
Thank you very much, John. Before starting in that, I think we should see that this question of the absolute beginning of the universe is a question which is at the same time a scientific question and a metaphysical question, because it is clear for everybody that the universe had an absolute beginning, following the principle of Parmenides, a Greek philosopher, on which everybody agree, ex nihilo nihil in Latin. Ex nihilo nihil. It means that from nothing, nothing can come. So here, we are here today, so it's clear that we are here and the universe exists. So as nothing can come from nothing, there is only two possibilities. Or the universe is, in some ways, eternal. It has never had an absolute beginning. Or there is something else which is eternal, which is God, a spirit, almighty, who has created this universe. So before starting that, we have to see that this question is both a question of physics and a question of metaphysics. And of course, it's clear and important to see that for the materialist, if you want to keep the belief to be a materialist and to believe it, you can never accept there is an absolute beginning, because you would have to change. So materialists necessarily, they believe that perhaps our universe had a beginning, but it's a beginning which is coming from something else. And perhaps Dr. Niayesh will tell us his position on that. So that's point one. It is a question which is physical and metaphysical. And the point two is that in science, it is important to know that there is no absolute proof. There is no absolute proof. Absolute proof exists only in mathematics. In the real world, the only thing we can do is to observe the reality. After observing the reality is to create a theory, to see if the theory has implication, and then to compare the implication to what we can observe to see if the theory is true or not. So in fact, what we can get in this world is evidence. So evidence is slightly different of proof. Evidence more or less is the same as we get in a court of justice. So when you have many evidence, I would say in one side of the scale and no evidence is the other, like the jury would say, well, I believe in the side where there are more evidence. So I think that these two things are very important. And after that, a question of history. In the past, everybody thought always, perhaps with the exception of the Bible, that the universe was eternal. It was a position of the philosopher, the Greek philosopher, and all the philosophers after. So it is the idea of an absolute beginning is a recent idea. and I don't want to make too much time, but it has started. We have collected during the 20th century more or less 5, 6, 7 evidence that it is highly improbable that our universe is eternal, and highly probable that it had an absolute beginning. But these are only evidence, and we shall see this evidence, discuss this evidence. The first one we will discuss will be the thermodynamics, which appeared in the middle of the 19th century.
I mean, I think just bracketing some of the philosophical considerations and focusing on the cosmology, what are some of those evidences that are observable that point to a beginning of the universe? Maybe just give just an overview of just a few of them.
Yes, okay. Again, pointing out to an absolute beginning, because there can have been many singularities before, many Big Bang before this Big Bang in a popular language. No, the absolute beginning is to know if the 5 or 6 evidence which have appeared since the middle of the century, 2 are coming from thermodynamic. The first of thermodynamic is everything wears out, so there will be an end. And if there is an end to something which has an end, will have an end, as necessarily a beginning, because minus infinite plus t is equal minus infinite. Everything which ends has necessarily a beginning, because if it had not a beginning, it would be finished since ever. The second of thermodynamics, so the thermodynamic is showing that everything wears out. And the second is that entropy, we know, if we were looking to the past, the entropy is getting there to a bigger order, a better order in the past. But a better order cannot be infinite, because when you have something which is perfectly ordered, you cannot go further. So entropy, in our opinion, I don't want to be too detailed, but the thermodynamic and entropy is bringing two different evidence that our universe cannot be eternal. After that, there is another one coming from the expansion of the universe and all what we know, the Big Bang, the fact that there will be no big crunch, the fact that even if there are series of singularities or Big Bang, the series cannot be an infinite series. So that's the third evidence. The fourth evidence is that if our universe was in one way or the other eternal, infinite should exist, because it would be infinite in the past. And what we know from physics during the last 100 years is that infinite does not exist, in fact. For example, there is a speed limit, which is light. There is a limit of the geography of the universe. 99% of the scientists today believe that our universe is closed. And there is a limit also in the infinite small, because there is a quantum, so there is no infinite. So if there is no physics infinite, our universe cannot be eternal. And after, there is a fourth evidence, or fifth evidence, in fact, which are coming from the mathematician. Also, it's Cantor and Hilbert. And Cantor and Hilbert have made many works showing that infinite is a purely mathematical notion. It's not a reality physics. And then after, there is a sixth evidence for no eternity, is a philosophical, but I don't think it would be a little bit long and painful. So the 20th century has collected several evidence that it is very improbable that I say very improbable because we don't have absolute proof. So, voila. And on the other side, which is on the side of the scale where you have on the other side, the universe would be eternal, we have just no evidence at all. So on one side of the scale, I would say that today we have 6 evidence that it is very improbable that our universe is eternal, and the other side, nothing. So it is rational, I think, to believe today that our universe had an absolute beginning sometime.
Niayesh, I saw that you were nodding your head to the first part of that, so sort of in terms of there is evidence for the Big Bang and inflation, perhaps, but maybe you started to shake your head when Michel was talking about the universe being eternal. So could you unpack how you view the Big Bang for us?
Yeah. So this is a fascinating topic, and as you just mentioned, we Phil and I wrote a book about this, and there is there is the question of the science and the question of what we want to do with the science. And maybe I'm going to come back to the question of Big Bang, because there is a lot of interesting things that are happening, and in fact happened in the last century, but even in the past like few years, there has been a kind of shift of thinking about what we mean by the Big Bang. But let me kind of step back to what Michel mentioned about, I think, the philosophical origins of this debate, which is if there's a beginning, then there must be God. Isn't that what you said, Michel? So that was the first thing you.
Yes, something. Not if you accept, I think that 99% of scientists and philosophers accept ex nihilo nihil. So as we are here, there are only two solutions. The first solution is that our universe is eternal. So in a way or another, and in that case, there is no question about that. Or if there is an absolute beginning, then we need a cause. And philosophically, this cause has a name which we give it. It's God.
Well, but so here's the thing. How do we know how the universe works, right? So the way that you said that if something has started, there must be a cause. So that's an observation. So you made a law, or you made a statement based on observations that we've made in the world. So we've seen things that come to be. If you see a meal sitting somewhere, you say, someone must have made that meal, right? So that's an observation. That's a very logical observation. Whenever we see something around us, someone has made it, at least most things, I mean, unless they've been around a long time. So that's a reasonable observation, but that's a statement about things that we've seen. So that's the universe that we know right now. But the question is, just because certain pattern or certain law applies to the universe that we see right now, does it mean that is always applied? And the question of the origins of a universe is something that's very remote from our everyday experience. It's the same way that, say, Einstein's prediction of black holes was very remote from everyday experiences, or quantum mechanics was very removed from everyday experiences. So we might have had ideas about how the world works, but then when we started probing places that are far removed from our everyday experiences, we ended up with things that were very different. So the question of that everything at the start at some point must have a cause, and you call that cause God, that's kind of extrapolating our everyday experience to a regime where there is no reason that these patterns should work the same way. So I just want to say that this premise that if there was a beginning, there must be a God, it's a premise that's based on extrapolation of our everyday experiences, which may or may not be true. I mean, we often do this, but we often have also examples of our extrapolation, our everyday experience has failed. As I gave to you examples of relativity, black holes, or quantum mechanics. So the other way to think about it, and so I want to say this from the perspective of a scientist, is we observe patterns in the universe, and we want to make these patterns as simple as possible and make predictions for other patterns that can be seen based on the patterns we've already seen. So that is my understanding in the scientific method, and that's how Newton's laws of physics or mechanics came about, how Einstein's theory of relativity came about, that's how quantum mechanics came about. So they were basically based on observation of various patterns and coming up with simple laws that could unify all of these patterns. And then the question is, are there things we cannot explain? And it turns out that, yes, whenever, at any point in the history of science, when you look at basically the modern scientific progress in the past 400 years, there have been things that science could explain, and there have been things that science couldn't explain. So we had laws that explain certain patterns, but then there were other things that laws couldn't explain. At any point in the history of science, there have been these gaps. Right now, that gap is, at least one of the places that we have this gap is as you go to the beginning of the universe. Another place is when you approach the black hole, somewhere near the horizon of a black hole. So these are places where our current scientific endeavors, as well and as successful as they have been, they come up short. Does that mean that now there is a deity? That's where our deities should sit? I mean, I would say that you could have said this at any point in the past 400 years, and maybe whenever there are lightning, that means, before we understood how lightnings work, you say it's the might of God that's striking us. But now we understand that we have scientific explanation for that. So, yeah, go ahead, John.
No, I just wanted to see what Michel made of that sort of God of the gaps claim. Is the beginning of the universe like anything else in the history of science, like a Zeus and lightning, or is it something distinctive for you?
No, there is no God of the gap. It doesn't exist at all. There is two possibilities, and it's very simple. Or God exists, or it doesn't exist. Well, it's very simple. It's basic. We are in philosophy, in logic, except if we refuse logic. But if we accept logic, God exists or it doesn't exist. So the question, like any theory, is to know if a theory has implication. Because theories which have no implication, you can't do anything with. Mm-hmm. Or what is very interesting is that the theory that God does not exist has many implications. It has many implications, and it has many implications which were not observable in the past, but which are observable today. So the first implication, if God doesn't exist, is that the universe cannot have an absolute beginning. And I want to say that there is a survey which shows that 99% of all the scientists in the world agree on that, which means more or less there are 50% of the scientists are believer in God and 50% are believer in materialism. So more or less close to 100% agree that ex nihilo nihil. So if God doesn't exist, the universe cannot have an absolute beginning. And for example, I take Robert Wilson, who is a Nobel Prize in cosmology and has discovered the echo of the Big Bang. And he has made an endorsement to our book, which is very nice of him. He has also corrected the book, in fact. And he says he's an agnostic. It's important. Well, an agnostic is almost an atheist, not completely. I don't believe in God, but I don't know. That's, I would say, agnostic. And he says in endorsement, and he says, but conversely, as the Big Bang theory suggests, if the universe had a beginning, then we cannot avoid the question of creation. So I think it's a very good endorsement and a very good, very simple thing from a top really scientist in the world. I repeat, if the universe had a beginning, then we cannot avoid the question of creation. So here we are. I think there is no God of the gap. It's yes or no, God exists or doesn't exist. And if the theory that it doesn't exist doesn't work, we have to accept that there is a superior mind who has made the universe, which is not more incredible than the fact that the universe would exist by itself. Both, everything is difficult to believe, but it's two different beliefs.
So in a sense, you're not arguing from a gap. You're arguing from, how you are interpreting the evidence in terms of an absolute beginning. I suppose, Niayesh, where you might disagree is whether scientists believe that there was an absolute beginning or whether the universe could have been eternal. Could you unpack sort of scientific views on that at the moment?
Absolutely. So I think that's and indeed. So as John, you might know that Phil and I have done our own survey. And in fact, there is one that's called Copenhagen survey last year about 100 or so physicists. And now we have actually a much bigger survey with all the American Physical Society members, more than 1,000, I think around 1,500 scientists. So I'm going to get to the question in a bit. I can tell you basically in terms of the survey, I don't see any consensus in the survey that there is an absolute beginning. I mean, based on our survey, the theory of Big Bang, if we ask them what Big Bang means, around 70% the scientists say that a universe was much hotter and much denser at early times, but it says nothing about the absolute beginning. So it's only about 10% or so that says Big Bang means there was an absolute beginning of time. So I don't know. I guess we kind of that is the result of our survey. And then, but I
Excuse me,
think
I would like just to refer. I think there is a misunderstanding. I, I
Mhm.
have not said that 99% of the people believe that there is a absolute beginning. I didn't say. I say that 99% of scientists and philosophers accept that if there is an absolute beginning, then there is a cause like God, which is completely different.
Okay.
But excuse me. So it means that 99% today of people accept the Parmenides principle, which is from nothing, nothing can come out of nothing. Well, this principle is accepted by almost everybody. And I agree that with Niayesh that many people do not believe that the Big Bang, of course, could be the absolute beginning. Many believe that it could be a Big Bang after another Big Bang, after another Big Bang, etc. Or there could be an infinite number of parallel universes, or there are other possibilities. But the question is to compare the possibility of other possibility with an absolute beginning, which is, in fact, which is the most easier to believe with what we know.
Very good. Okay, so I think we could argue about the details of this, but let me. I want a clarification on something else that you said, that we have to compare the evidence, and I completely agree with you that you have to basically see what are the implications. So in my language, what are the predictions of your theory, so that I can go out and test it. And the question is, if you believe there is a God, so what is the prediction? How can I falsify that or test that a statement and there's a God? So I take it that you're saying that if there is a beginning, that's a prediction. Your prediction is that there was a beginning. Is that the only prediction of the God hypothesis? If I want to
No,
put it that way.
no. Alors, Niayesh, it's very important. There are two different theories. The theory that there is a God existing, creator of the universe, and the theory that the God is not existing. It's very important because it is necessarily or one or the other. There is no in between. So there is no, just finish. The theory that God exists has no prediction. You use the word prediction. I usually use the word implication, but I think it's the same. So the theory that God exists has no implication or no prediction. At the opposite, which is very interesting, the theory that God does not exist has many implications or many predictions. Several, I give you 3 scientific predictions, but there are many other. 3 predictions of the fact that God does not exist. The first one is that the universe cannot be eternal. In that case, it is if God does not exist, it cannot have an absolute beginning. The second, yes, that's the first one. The second is that there is no reason for which it is fine-tuned. So there is no explanation of the fine-tuning. And third, if God does not exist, life must appear naturally from matter. Voilà. 3 scientific implications or prediction from the theory God does not exist.
You mentioned fine-tuning. I'll let you come back in just a moment,
Yes,
Niayesh. But we do need to... Niayesh, I wanted to give you just a final opportunity to respond there to what Michel was saying before we look at another topic.
Well, I hope it's not the final opportunity, especially if the universe is eternal. I hope I get more opportunities. But let's kind of get back this question. Michel is making the statement that if there is God, there is no implication. But if there is no God, the implication is that universe is eternal. Now, I want to put it to you that you can never compare theories that have no implication with theories that have implication. You always, in the scientific method, you can only compare things that have implications. This is basically called Bayes' theorem, and you can look for Bayes in evidence. So you look at observations, and you have 2 different models. Different models make different predictions, or for this observation, we see which one fits the data better. So otherwise, it's not a fair fight. It's saying that this side can never lose. This side, whatever happens, you can test this side, but this other side, you cannot test it. So I think I put it to you that if you really want to talk about evidence for God, you have to actually put your kind of neck on the line and say that this is the prediction that my God model has. And then, of course, the opposite, if the person who doesn't believe in God might want to make their own predictions. So that's my statement number one. My statement number two is that I know, I've worked on many Big Bang models. Many of them, in fact, we have a list of 22 of them in our book, is the cheat sheet. But yeah, some of them there's an absolute beginning. Some of them don't have an absolute beginning. For example, there is one that I talked about. We call it holographic cosmology. And the idea there is that basically there's a point at which time emerges, and we have a basically timeless theory at the beginning that basically there is no notion of time, there is just notion of a space. Another one is a no boundary proposal of the famous late physicist Stephen Hawking and Jim Hartle, but they both have passed away, unfortunately, now. And in that, there is no time also. There is basically the direction of time becomes a space. So there are, in fact, 4 space dimensions. And these are theories that have predictions. Now, not all predictions are as easy to test or as good as others, but nonetheless, these are examples of the theories that have predictions, but also have a beginning. And then the question is, okay, so, there is no God in these. These are models that make predictions, and you could compare them to data. They may be ruled out, but they're still predictions. So I don't know. So I don't really subscribe this point of view. I don't really see the argument that why, if there is a beginning, then there must be a God.
I want to return to this idea later on of, what constitutes a good God hypothesis, and maybe we can circle back in this cyclical way to the beginning of the conversation. But there is another line of evidence that you raise in your book, Michel, which is this argument from fine-tuning. So the fine-tuning of nature's constants. So would you be able to unpack for us how you develop this argument in the book?
Well, that's what is wonderful in the fine-tuning. First, it's very recent because it's dating perhaps something like in the 1960s, when we have started to be able to make real model of the universe. And just for the auditors, to make it very simple, we could say that our universe is built upon 20 or 30 important numbers. These 20 or 30 numbers, we know a few of them. For example, the speed of the light, 300,000 kilometers per second. That's a number. Why is it that so? Why is it not more or less? And what would happen if it was more or if it was less? And so what has been discovered by the scientists between 1960s and the beginning of 2000, during the last 40, 50 years, is that the 30 numbers on which are built our universe are extraordinarily fine-tuned. And on this fact, all the scientists today agree. For example, I will just give an example. The speed of expansion of the universe at its very beginning, we know the number. It's a number, and we know the 15th first decimals of this number. And it has been calculated that is the 15th decimal of this number was one more or one less. In both cases, our universe would not exist. So how is it that this number is so extraordinarily, wonderfully fine-tuned? And the same for the other number. So in fact, I think that today, to make it simple, everybody in science agrees that our universe is fine-tuned. So you have 2 possibilities again here. So the first possibility is to say, well, that's wonderful. That's exactly what we said. There is an almighty mind we call God that has finely tuned, like a clockmaker. The universe is a clock and God is a clockmaker. So it's normal if it is well tuned. And the other, those who say there is a clock and there is no clockmaker, well, what they have to say is that there are billions of universe, and we are very lucky. We are in the good one, where the speed is perfect and when everything is just perfect. And we are lucky, but there are billions of universe which are unlucky, where there is no life and there is etc. No, and it's not. So it's the proof of nothing. So in one case, finalement, the choice is reduced to 2 possibilities: multiverse, but we have no argument for multiverse, or God. So it is the same in the scale. What do we want to explain? The fine-tuning, a creator God, or the fact that we have the chance to be in the very good universe thanks to the multiverse?
Niayesh, I have a feeling you're maybe not going to go for the multiverse, but then you're probably also not going to go for God either. So, I mean, how would you unpack this? Would it be a multiverse, or would it be some other kind of explanation?
So I think Michel is talking a lot about the percentage of physicists who believe in things. So this is like hot off the press. In fact, it is unpublished result, but I have this result in front of me for this American Physical Society survey we just did, and there were 25% of the respondents of 1,500 or so who said basically the constants of nature are what they are. They don't need explanation. So this is a statement that they're fine-tuned. I mean, in fact, this is the plurality, the biggest answer when you ask the question of what about, I mean, is there fine tuning of the constants? So most people say that basically these are what they are. There is no explanation. The multiverse is around 20%. There is some principle that could explain them. That would be around 15%. And the number of people who say that there's an intelligent designer, also known as God, is less than 10%, around 9%. So the opinions are diverse on this, but the main question is this fine tuning? Is it a scientific problem, or is it like more of a decorative problem, if you want? I don't know if that's the right word for it, or semantic problem. Again, going back to the definition of science, a scientific method, you want to have two different hypotheses, and you want to have predictions from the two different hypotheses, and then compare them. So on the one hand, there is this question of, okay, you want a hypothesis for what are these constants? Is there a theory that predicts what these constants should be? So this statement of fine-tuning is a statement about what we think the constants should be. So the constants are somehow random numbers that should be picked. And somehow the values are very atypical. The typical values wouldn't be like this. What is the problem with that? The problem with that is that we don't actually know what a random set of constants, look like. Right. So this kind of depends on your perspective on what what a multiverse is, how different constants in different universes should look like. If you just have one universe with one set of constants, the idea of probability of if something you fine-tune is something likely or unlikely is not really well defined. So that's one problem, is that the materialistic basically side doesn't really have a concrete prediction. There are different ideas for how there could be predictions, and some of them may have to explain the fine tuning, and others don't have a fine tuning problem.
So it would be a little bit like, I think one of the analogies you use in the book is, if I'm rolling a die, I know that there's a 1 in 6 chance of me getting any particular number because I know how the die is set up, so it has 6 sides. You're suggesting that we don't have that kind of probability measure in the case of the universe. Michel, how would you respond to that kind of objection about probability?
First, I think that survey and percentage are important. In our book, we have a full chapters about the survey of what the scientists think. It's important because science, I think we will agree together, is the best path for knowledge today, the best recognized path for knowledge today. So we have been there is a Pew Research Center. The Pew Research Center, it's the most important institute for survey in the United States. So they have been asking very recently, this is our book, to all the scientists, people who are more than PhD, what was their opinion of the existence of a creator God. And the result is that 51% of the scientists more than PhD in the United States believes that there is a creator God, and 45% believes there is no creator God. So it's an important percentage to see the photo of the scientists today in the United States. And it's important because I think that many people believe that the scientists would be frequently materialist, and that's not true. It is just shared, I would say, half and half. And what is also interesting in the Pew Research statistic survey that we have is that the young scientists believe more in God than the old one. And the fine-tuning, so of course with Niayesh, that we are here to discuss, and it's very interesting. Um, the fine-tuning, I think, is a very important evidence. And we recall in our book that Fred Hoyle, who was a materialist, completely opposed to God and, of course, to the Big Bang, is the author of the word Big Bang, and it was a mockery against the Maître. At the end of his life, Fred Hoyle, because of the fine-tuning of the carbon, he decided to become a deist. So you see that the fine-tuning is something which is of the universe, is something very important. And the case of Fred Hoyle, which is very well known, that Fred Hoyle went to atheist to deist, believing that God exists, because of the fine-tuning of the carbon, is very interesting. So I think that the fine-tuning, some people will say probably that, well, it's like this, there is nothing to explain. But some others say, well, that's fantastic, and there is no way we can explain it except if there is a superior mind.
But I want to push you a little bit further there, Michel, in terms of, say if, in Niayesh's survey, 30% of cosmologists or physicists or whoever they are say, this is just a brute fact. I mean, when we look at a triangle, the sides all add up to 180 degrees. Why is that? Well, it just does. What would be the problem with seeing this as just a brute fact in your perspective?
First, I don't have the survey of Dr. Niayesh, so I would be interested to have a look at it. I don't know what it is exactly. I know what we know together is that on the fine-tuning, everybody agrees that there is a fine-tuning. So nobody is contesting the fact that if the numbers were different, it would not work. So on that fact, I would say that everybody agrees. And then after, you have several possible explanations. The most usual explanation is a multiverse. Well, it's a possibility. One of my good friends who helped us to write the book, Yann Membrini, is a very well-known cosmologist in France. He's an atheist and he believes in multiverse, and we are very friends. Well, that's life. We have the right to have a different opinion on that. But there is a fine-tuning, and it's important to remember that materialism is a belief. It's a belief like the other. So if we have a scale in our mind, in our interior, we have a scale. We have to compare the credibility of different beliefs. We have to compare the credibility of the clockmaker, which is a creator God, if you prefer, and in the other, that there is no cause because multiverse, because no eternal beginning, because etc. So we have to compare the two scales, the two sides of the scales. And in my opinion, but of course it is an opinion, there is no absolute proof, today, the side of the scale showing that there is a clockmaker, a creator God, is extremely strong, and the other side is, in my opinion, quite weak.
Niayesh, I have to say, when I sometimes show my students the fine-tuning of the universe, and I will give them William Lane Craig's video explanation of his argument, they are really bowled over by this. I mean, it seems like this amazing thing, and yet you're saying that there are issues with the probability. If you were to convince me that this is just a brute fact, or this is maybe necessary in some way, how would you go about doing that?
Yeah, it's a strange thing, but I mean, I think I want to kind of fall back on the laurels of scientific method. That is that if you have, I mean, there are things that we make in our mind, but at the end of the day, the way that science had made progress in the past 4 centuries or so is by making predictions and either falsifying them or verifying them, right? So we may make observations and may feel uncomfortable things, but at the end of the day, if you cannot show me a prediction that that either would falsify it or verify your hypothesis, then there's really nowhere you can go from there. And here the contrast is really stark, because on the one hand we have these models that are trying to do predictions as best as they can, and in some places they come short, like we cannot predict constants of nature. On the other hand, there is no prediction. And this is the false comparison. I kept pushing Michel for a prediction from the God hypothesis.
I don't agree.
Oh, let's hear from Michel on that.
Yes, I don't agree. The theory, the materialistic theory, which is a theory like any other, the theory that there is no creator God, that there is nothing else that matters space time. This theory has prediction. It has prediction. And the first prediction is that the universe had no absolute beginning. That is the first prediction. And the second prediction, yes, it has, because everybody agrees that from ex nihilo nihil. Yes, but everybody agree on that. You would be, I think you are the only one I have ever heard who does not accept ex nihilo nihil. So the theory of God does not exist. The theory of materialism has prediction. It has strong prediction. The first one is that the universe has no absolute beginning. That's the first one. And we know that it's probably completely false. The second one is that it has no reason to be fine-tuned. It cannot be fine-tuned. And the reality shows that it is fine-tuned. And the third one is that life should arise naturally from matter. And we know today that it is naturally, it's impossible. So we have prediction. So when you say that the theory has no prediction, it has prediction, and this prediction can be falsified. This is why it's very important. I cannot accept that you say that it has no predictions.
Okay, so I didn't say my materialism doesn't have prediction. I mean, I can take issue with the fact that you say it's falsified, but let's take your word for it that is are all falsified. What prediction does your theory have?
Which theory?
The God theory.
But Niayesh, it's very simple. If the theory that God does not exist as prediction, and if predictions are falsified, which are the case for me today, then as it is a binary theory, then the opposite theory is necessarily true. So if the theory that God does not exist is falsified and shows that it is wrong, then the opposite theory is binary, is necessarily true, then God exists. So you see, it's very simple.
I want to dig a little bit deeper into this idea. I want to dig a little bit deeper into this idea of, theism having predictive power, because I'm aware of a philosopher at Princeton University who is a Christian, but he thinks
Which one?
Because
I was in Princeton last week.
Hans Halvorsen, who's professor, I believe, of philosophy of physics at Princeton. He doesn't like the fine-tuning argument because he says the fine-tuning argument assumes that life is extremely improbable. But of course, if you have a God wants life. So why are the constants set up in such a way that life is incredibly improbable? Maybe Niayesh, you could comment on whether you're taken by that line of reasoning, and then we'll get a response from Michel.
Yeah, right. So I think, I don't consider myself as a materialist. I mean, I think I certainly grew up in Iran in a religious, studied in a religious country, religious family, religious background. So that was part of my upbringing for at least 20 years and more. And this is, I don't consider myself either an atheist or a materialist. But I think God is part of human civilization, want it or not. It is here with us and drives most of the dynamics that happens amongst us. So that is there. That is real. The question is, what do you want to do with this fact, right? The fact that we talk about God now and often. And the problem is that you're kind of putting God in a very vulnerable position as a scientific theory. And scientific theories are kind of dime a dozen. They just get ruled out left and right? But they want something that's kind of deep and strong, and it cannot be just easily falsified. And that's not a scientific hypothesis. That's something different. This question of what God does, it's kind of going in that direction of making a prediction. The problem with that is that everyone's God does something different. Like a Muslim God does something, a Jewish God does something else, a Christian God, and your friend's God at Princeton thinks differently from Michel's God. So this is the issue, is that saying that the God hypothesis says universe started from some point is your version of the God. And the problem is that there is no universal prediction of what God does. I think this idea of creation ex nihilo, I don't think that it's shared in, say, say Buddhist God wouldn't have something like that. Maybe reincarnation is something that's more similar to that. So that's the issue of mixing these two kind of planes.
I'm sorry, because I was in Princeton and Berkeley last week, and we had conference about God and science in both. And I'm sorry, Niayesh, because I would have loved to have you in these two conferences. If we redo it, we had 3 Nobel Prize in the conference. We had John Matter, that you know probably. John Matter is a Nobel Prize of astrophysicist. He's a strong atheist.
Mm-hmm.
We had William Phillips, who is also a very well-known scientist, and he's a Christian. And we had also Saul Perlmutter in Berkeley, who is also an atheist. Very nice. And we had lunch and dinner together. It was very nice. We were very friendly and discussing very nicely this question. It's not a question of religion. We don't care what is the name of God. That's completely another topic. We just want to know if matter exists by itself and there is nothing else, or if there is a clockmaker. We don't want to go, and I understand you very well when you say that you believe in God, but you don't want to have a religion. I understand that very well. And it's not a question of religion to know if God exists. In fact, the question of if there is a clockmaker is another question. It's not a question of religion.
I want to home in on this question of God, and more broadly the question of the relationship between science and faith, because obviously many scientists, and even ones in the 20th century, have been very influential on cosmology and have also been believers themselves. We might think of the Catholic priest Georges Lemaitre with his primeval atom, or what was to become the Big Bang. But as far as I'm aware, I mean, to take Lemaitre, he wanted to keep his faith and his science apart. He wrote somewhere, "As far as I can see, such a theory of the primeval atom remains entirely outside of any metaphysical or religious question. It leaves the materialist free to deny any transcendental being." Michel, what do you make of Lemaitre's claim there?
John, I have to tell you that your narrative is not completely exact, because all what you say about Lemaitre is true, but it was before that his theory was proven to be true. It is when you are talking of the years 50, and especially when he went to see Pius XII to tell him not to use this theory for any religious purpose. It was before 63, because he died in 64 and Pius XII died in 1958. So it was before. And when it was before, not only this theory was not proven, but it was disliked by, I would say, most of the scientists. It was even so almost forgotten. Then when Penzias and Wilson discovered the echo, they had to ask many people, because nobody understood what was this echo of 3 degrees Fahrenheit. So it was something which was in the dust a little bit, the primeval. So what you say about it, I understand what you mean about Lemaitre, but what would be interesting, what would have been interesting, but it is impossible, is what Lemaitre and Pius XII would have said after 64 if they have been alive, but they were not.
I wonder also what they would have said, reading Battle of the Big Bang. I think, it's interesting because you have all of these different competing models of the universe, and scientists are disagreeing about whether the universe was eternal, whether it wasn't eternal. I wonder whether he would have remained sort of keeping his metaphysics apart from his philosophy. Niayesh, I suppose on this question, someone might say that you have all of these different models of the universe. To what extent are these models functioning a little bit like mythological creation stories? Is there a real difference between the models you explore in your book and just any other kind of faith, I suppose?
Yeah, and I think that's what I think is unique about our treatment is that we are mixing together, basically seeing where is the interface of science and faith, and in fact, to what extent scientists are acting as faithful, and to what extent faithful are acting as scientists. So. Uh,
Mm.
so basically, our point of view is that both God or faith and science are aspects of humanity, and they are intertwined together. We cannot really separate one from the other. Um, so we are very creative, very imaginative people, but also we are guided by evidence. As Michel says, we should follow the evidence, but we also have to have a strict set of rules for, I mean, what we want to do with the evidence and what we want to do with our imagination. Imagination is amazing. We love to read books. We have science fiction. We have movies. All of that. So we love to kind of entertain possibilities, and that can lead science. But on the other hand, it also could mislead science, because some of the things that we imagine may just be elusive. It may not be real, right? It might be things that we have imagined, and we have to look for evidence. So what we do in our book is to try to be clear about what are the things that are grounded in evidence. The fact that our universe started from a hot phase, so cosmic microwave background, the echo of the Big Bang that Michel talked about, that is one of our most strong pieces of evidence about what happened at the early times. The tiny ripples in this microwave background is another piece of evidence. The amount of light elements we have in the universe, helium, lithium, things like that, that's yet another piece of evidence. So we have these pieces of evidence that are kind of established. Now, we can never prove any of these theories, but we are things that we have some guidelines or some baselines that all of the hypotheses should abide by. But beyond that, anything goes, and we have creative, bizarre ideas. Some of them are emergence out of a higher dimensional black holes, the theory that you alluded to. Another is that maybe we live inside black holes. Yet another is that maybe we live inside time loops. Everything kind of goes all over again, or starts all over again. That's the theory.
It's a groundhog day of the universe. We're just living our lives again and again.
Again and again. So it's something that I call periodic time cosmology, which is somewhat similar to what Sir Roger Penrose calls conformal cyclic cosmology, basically cycles of time. So there are various ideas out there, and there are creative, crazy ideas, but they all have this Feynman's straitjacket that basically they're saying that you have all your imagination, but then you have to abide by observations or by experiments. And that is what makes us different from old mythologies where basically there were no predictions. So ultimately, a theory that doesn't make predictions is not a theory. And this is kind of a vulnerability of the theory. And in some sense, this is also why I don't want to put God or religion at the same plane, because really, if you want to bring that God down to the scientific arena, you're making God vulnerable to basically being disproven.
Well, I wanted to ask Michel about this actually, because it sometimes feels like, we'd love to have very clear scientific evidence, suggestive evidence for God, but then doesn't it create this vulnerable space where if the evidence suddenly shifts, or if one of Niyesh's 4 or 5, really intriguing models suddenly starts to take up a lot of evidence, then doesn't the God hypothesis fall apart?
First of all, there is something which is very important, is a question of God, faith, and religion. God is a question of reason. The existence of a creator God is a question of reason and a question of science. Is there a clockmaker or not? It is a fact. It is true or it is false. There is no in between. It's not a question of religion. It's not a question of faith. There is a clockmaker or there is no clockmaker. There is no in between. So it's a fact, and like any other fact, it can be discussed. And the fact, as we have now, I think, explained, that if there is no clockmaker, there are predictions, and this prediction can be verified. is something of the existence of God. Religions and faith, I don't like to use this word and to mix it because it's something which is completely different. Uh, uh, the existence of God is, does it exist? And what is his name? Who he is? What are his properties? What does he think? What does he want? That's a question of religion, because we cannot know anything if God exists. We cannot know anything about him except if he is giving a revelation of himself to the man. Bon, alors, voilà. So if there is no revelation, we can know nothing, of course, about the creator God. It's impossible. We can know that he exists, but we can know nothing about him. So we should have the existence of God on one side of our brain and faith and religion in the other side of our brain. Our book is a book for general public. If we have some auditors, it is easy to understand to everyone. I would say as soon as you are 17 years old, or even to my mother-in-law, or to anyone. And excuse me. So the question of religion and faith is something completely different. So our book is not a book of faith. It's not the book of religion. It is only a book which is discussing with reason and science all what we can say today about the existence or not of a creator God. And not only in science, because science, of course, is number one, but not only in science. Philosophy is existing. It's a path of knowledge also, which is very important. So we have also chapters of philosophy, and we have chapters of history, and we have also some chapters of philosophy are very important. For example, if God does not exist, if there is no creator God, good and evil do not exist either. And it's a question that we have to ask to ourselves. Do we think that it can be true? Good and evil do not exist at all? We could kill whoever we want if we vote for. Are we ready to accept that? In a book, very famous book from Dostoevsky, the brothers Karamazov, Ivan Karamazov, at that time people were starting to be atheist, Ivan Karamazov says, well, if God does not exist, then everything is permitted. So this is why it's an important question. So our book is discussing, and Niayesh, I'm sure, is exactly the same. We are discussing only if there is a clockmaker. The question of faith, of religion is completely another topic. Who is God? Even who is his name? His name is Yahweh or Allah, or whatever you want. And what does he want? Is he nice or not nice? It's another question.
It's very interesting. You're almost putting them in the different corners of the brain. They're sort of the left and the right hemispheres for these different approaches to the question. Niayesh, I'm really fascinated, if you're happy sharing. I mean, you talk in the book about how you grew up in Iran as a theocracy. So I assume you were sort of from a practicing Muslim home. Did you ever find this conflict between your faith and your science? Was that to come along later, now that you identify as an agnostic? How did you hold those two in balance?
It's actually quite fascinating, because, I mean, the discussion we're having is kind of abstract right now, but I mean, I did grow up in a theocracy, and the religion is much more in-face there, because basically we have religious police there that says that you have to cover your hair and you have to behave in this way. In fact, I tell a story of my future wife and myself being in the same classroom, because there were two of us there. The security took us to their headquarters because we were not allowed to be in the same room together. So that was
wow.
So there are very obvious signs of religion going kind of extreme in a theocracy, and of course those are extreme situations. At least by some standards they're extreme, although you may argue how extreme they are. The thing that actually came was at that point, although it took time, but is the question of whether this religion is a way of controlling people's life. Basically, it's a kind of weapon, a kind of tool for gatekeepers of religion to tell others how they should live their lives. And the most obvious example of that was where I grew up. But I mean, that is happens across the board. That basically religion is used as a way to influence politics, either explicitly or implicitly. And certainly something that's going on in the United States, in Canada, in Europe. There are various versions of that. And I think that was really the breaking point for me, that where it became kind of almost too explicit for me. And it's again, it doesn't mean that there is no God. It just means that it is something that can be very easily abused by the people who kind of act as gatekeepers of God. Because God doesn't talk to people, talks to the prophets or whoever who claims to represent God. And then those are the people who now have all the power. So this is, yeah, go ahead. Michel,
Yes, no, I would like to say, you just said that God can be used to abuse people. And I want to keep what you just said, because we must not forget that materialism similarly has been used to abuse people differently in Germany at the time of Hitler, and in Russia in the time of Stalin, and in China in the time of Mao Zedong. So it's not God which is used by people. It's not God only, which is used by people to abuse people and to voila. It's any philosophy. So every philosophy can be unfortunately used by bad people just to control the people. But it's not a specialty. It's not a special case of God. It's also materialism is the same.
I absolutely, I agree with you, and this is why I'm saying that I'm not making the case for atheism. Any completely atheist society can be similarly kind of oppressionist, because as long as you kind of force an ideology in people and say that there are kind of gatekeepers of this ideology, be it communism or Islam or Christianity or Catholicism. So as long as there are gatekeepers of ideology, then they could kind of use that as a way to control people and oppress people. So indeed, and this is why science is important. And I just should actually circle back and say that this is something that even cosmologists are vulnerable to. So when we kind of talk to each other and we try to advocate for our models, but we don't have evidence, we also kind of use similarly operationistic, maybe things that are not supposed to be used as scientific tools, but they are, like maybe funding and job recruitments. And there are various kind of levers that we use to kind of live in our communities, our academic communities. And they, if we don't use evidence, if we cannot use scientific evidence or observations to guide us, then there are these other things that are much more kind of brutal and much more, non-scientific, that drives what we do. So scientists are not immune to that, and even atheists are not immune to that. But I think we have to then be careful and clear about what is the right way for us to interact with each other. And I mean, where evidence takes us, we should basically, no ideology is immune to a scrutiny. And I think that's the key thing, be it communism, be it Catholicism, being Islam. If you want something to control people or a way to govern a society, it should be open to a scrutiny. And that's that. I mean, I think maybe we're kind of moving away a little bit from Big Bang, but I guess you are thinking about growing up in Iran. And indeed, that was this is the key thing, is that it's very easy to abuse these concepts, and we have to be careful with that.
I wonder whether you. Oh, sorry, Michel. Do you go on?
Just to end that, we last week we had a conference about God and science in Princeton. I can send you the link of the website, and then another one in Berkeley. There was 3 Nobel Prize winner there, plus a dozen of very top scientists, and we have been discussing very nicely the question of what can science say about Creator God. As I told you, there were 2 Nobel Prize who are atheists, John Matter and Saul Perlmutter, and there was one who was a Christian, William Phillips. And really, we had lunch, we had dinners together. It was really very interesting, and it was very nice. And for example, in France, one of the cosmologists who has helped us very much. Jan Mambrini is very well known. He has written many books, and he's an atheist. He's going to marry next year. He's not very young. He's 58. Good to marry at 58. And he's marrying, and he has been asking me, who is a Christian, to be his best man. So I believe it's very, very nice that a cosmologist atheist who has been helping to write our book, when he marries, he's taking as his best man a Christian. It's very nice. So it's a pity to believe that there should be, unfriendly attitude or hard attitude. I think we have to keep, like in the whole time in Europe, which is, the conversation with friendshipness and with friendship and nice. It is possible, and it is very important. We can estimate and like each other like good friends with different opinions. And if not, it would be horrible. It's war.
I think one thing that's interesting is that we're treating God really as a scientific hypothesis here. And yet I think a lot of religious people would not treat God as a hypothesis as such. The idea of, God as clockmaker, a phrase that you use a few times, Michel, feels like sort of God is tacked onto the universe. I really like a quotation by Blaise Pascal, who obviously Pascal's triangle and a sort of, I suppose, an early astronomer in some ways. He says that the heart has its reasons that reason does not understand. And I wondered, maybe I could ask you both this question, whether there's a way in which faith could be congruous with science and sit alongside it without these kinds of arguments from fine-tuning or cosmology, so it doesn't sort of rest on those arguments. Maybe starting with you, Niayesh, on that question. Can they coexist?
I think that's an excellent question. It's one that I wonder about often, and it's a question of, at some level, it is an experimental question, because we had humanity for, I don't know, maybe thousands of years, at least in written history, and there have been ups and downs for that coexistence. You would hope that there is a peaceful coexistence at some point. It's hard to see where it could be just science, because in some sense, because of the questions that Michel brought up, like what is good and evil, how do we decide how we live our lives? And we always have to grapple with that. And science never answers that. I mean, science tells you what happens if you do this, what actions would have what consequences. But what consequences you want is not a question that science answers. So I think we want to find a peaceful coexistence. And then this question of God, the clockmaker, I feel that if that's part of the equation, the clockmaker should never stop making the clock. It's just going to keep running it, because it feels very kind of lonely if you say clockmaker made the clock and then let it go, and then we're alone on our own now.
I mean, David Hume famously said that maybe, he made the clock and then died, or something, went off, or maybe there were many clockmakers. It's interesting. Michel, your response.
So, what makes the problem a little bit more complicated than any other question is that the question of a creator God is unfortunately also a passionate question. And it's easy to show that it's a passionate question, because there are two questions which are very similar. And I give you these two questions. First question, do the Martian exist? And the other, do the Martian, the aliens, the extraterrestrial, do they exist? And the second question is, do a creator God exist? And you can see that these two questions are almost completely similar, because it is a question to know if an existing person that we have never seen exists or not. So in both cases, does a person which we have never seen exist or not? So the questions are very similar. If we talk of Martians, we are between scientists and everybody is very happy, and we are spending a lot of money, and there is never dispute between states. We are sending rockets and satellites to know if Martians exist, and we have lunch together and say, well, if Martians exist, it will be really very interesting, because they know us probably a lot. And if they don't exist, well, it's a pity, but that's life. So there is no At the opposite, when you talk of a creator God exists, you have immediately some people who react like that, and it's passionate. And of course, we understand why. It is because everybody understands that a creator God, the clockmaker, it could be, it is not, but it could be a limitation of our freedom. You know, many things are forbidden in the Bible. You won't kill, you won't cheat your wife, you won't lie, etc. So it's a limitation of what you have the right to do. So many people see a creator God as a tyrant or a judge. So as they don't want to be facing a tyrant and a judge, well, just between brackets, they are wrong. He's not a tyrant and a judge. But however, this is what many people think. So as they think that, they say, God, no. And I like this citation of George Wald, a Nobel Prize of Medicine that we have in our book. And George Wald, who is a Nobel Prize winner in biology, he says, because we have not been talking very much of biology, he says, for the spontaneous generation of life, there is only two hypotheses. One is that God created life, and the other one, that it is coming naturally. We know now, I simplify, we know now that natural generation doesn't work. But as I am an atheist, I don't want to believe in God, so I prefer to believe in what I know impossible, which is in the natural generation of matter to life. So it's a citation which has a reference. I think it's a very interesting citation. First, George Wald, I think, is very honest, saying something like that. It's very honest. The citation is as a reference. And he say, well, I just don't want to live with the idea of the creator God. So I prefer to believe that life can appear easily from matter. So I think it's very interesting citation.
Well, Niayesh, in his book, he uses the idea that these models of the universe are a little bit like cosmic memories. You know, they're our earliest memories as humanity. And, you know, the reason why memory is such an important metaphor there is it goes to the heart of identity as well. And Michel, Niayesh, I wish I could talk to you for another 2 hours, but unfortunately we've run out of time. But we've done everything in this episode. We've looked at the beginning of the universe. We've looked at fine-tuning the God hypothesis. It's been really thrilling. So just thanks again to my guests. That's Dr. Niayesh Afshordi and Michel-Yves Bolloré for such a rich and thought-provoking discussion. And don't forget to pick up a copy of God, the Science and the Evidence, available for the first time in English this October. Niayesh has got his copy already. And balance that out also with Niayesh and Phil's Battle of the Big Bang, available at all good bookstores. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it, leave a review on Apple Podcasts, and consider supporting our work at premierunbelievable.com. Let us know what you think of this discussion and email us at premierunbelievable@premier.org.uk. Until next time, I'm John Nelson, and you've been watching and listening to Unbelievable.